My name is Helena Trevino. I'm 36 years old, and last April, I unlocked the door of my great-aunt's map room in the old house outside Galena, Illinois, and found 183 empty drawers. My 9-year-old son was still in the back seat of the car, finishing the second half of a peanut butter sandwich, because I'd told him to wait while I ran in to grab one quick thing. I didn't grab anything. There was nothing left to grab. The room smelled the way it had always smelled: linen rag paper, old varnish, the faint mineral note of beeswax someone had been rubbing into the cabinets twice a year since the Eisenhower administration. Except now, the smell had nowhere left to live. My parents had sold every map, every nautical chart, every hand-illuminated atlas plate my great-aunt had spent 40 years collecting and had legally left to my son. They sold the whole archive for $240,000. They spent the money on a custom wine cellar for my brother and his wife, with a temperature-controlled tasting nook and a Tuscan tile floor flown in from Italy. What I did in the next 11 days didn't involve a single shouted word, but by the end of it, my parents could no longer afford the house they had lived in for 34 years. And when I finally said the sentence that made my mother set down her glass of Chardonnay so hard it cracked the rim against the granite countertop, at least 4 of the guests were holding their phones at hip height with the camera app open. Welcome to Calm Drama Stories. This channel is for the quiet kind of reckoning. The kind that doesn't yell, doesn't throw, doesn't slam a door, and doesn't hand the people who hurt you the satisfaction of calling you the unstable one. If you have ever watched a family treat someone else's inheritance like a yard sale category, leave a comment and subscribe, because the next story will find you exactly when you need it. Before I tell you what they did, I need to tell you about Aunt Theodora. Theodora Marston was my great-aunt on my mother's side. She was the first woman in our family to take a doctorate, Historical Cartography, University of Chicago, 1962. And she was, until the day she died at 86, the only person in our family who believed that a map was not a piece of decor. She believed a map was a sworn statement made by a person in a place at a moment in time, and that a serious map deserved to be treated the way other people treated witnesses in court. She inherited a small but real fortune from her father's grain elevator business, sold her own share at 38, and spent the next 4 decades buying maps. Not the maps tourists buy framed in airport gift shops, real ones. Manuscript portolan charts from the late 15th century, drawn on calfskin in Genoa and Lisbon. Engraved sea atlases printed in Amsterdam in the long shadow of the Dutch East India Company. Hand-colored county atlases of the Mississippi watershed from before the Civil War, when the towns on the riverbank still had 2 names, one in English and one in something else. A single working sketch by John Mitchell, made on tracing paper in 1755, that scholars at 3 different universities had been quietly negotiating to borrow for the better part of a decade. 183 items in total, individually cataloged, individually appraised, individually conserved, and individually housed in the bank of shallow archival drawers Theodora had built into the north wall of the second-floor map room of the family house outside Galena. In 2009, when she was 73, Theodora did something that none of us at the time fully understood. She established the Theodora Marston Cartographic Trust, a 501c3, federally registered, audited annually by a small specialist firm out of St. Louis, filed in Springfield with the Illinois Secretary of State. The maps were formally transferred into the trust and placed on what is called, in this kind of arrangement, a permanent loan back to the residents. In plain English, the collection legally belonged to the trust. It physically lived in the house. In exchange for housing the collection in a climate-controlled, insured, professionally documented setting, the house received a conditional property tax exemption, an arrangement Illinois permits for properties that serve as the custodial site for a registered scholarly archive. That exemption saved my parents somewhere between $22,000 and $26,000 a year, every year, for 14 years. The deal had one condition. 1. The collection stayed in the house, unsold, until it passed to the next direct line descendant named by the trust. In 2019, 2 years before she died, Theodora added the final amendment to the trust instrument. She named my son Matteo as the sole beneficiary. Matteo was 4. Theodora sat him in her own desk chair, an enormous green leather thing that had belonged to her father, and she opened a single drawer and lifted out one map, a hand-colored 1763 plan of the Mississippi at the confluence of the Galena River, the ink still as clean and sharp as the day it had been laid down. And she said to him, very seriously, the way she said everything, "These are yours now, Matteo. You take care of them, and they will take care of you for the rest of your life." Matteo nodded. He was 4. He didn't understand a word of it. But on the back of every single one of those 183 items, on the protective interleaf above the document itself, Theodora had pasted a small engraved label in her own handwriting. "For Matteo, who will keep them honest." Matteo touched that line every single time he opened a drawer. It became his ritual. He never skipped it once. My mother had been circling that map room for almost 2 years. It started small, a comment over Christmas dinner in 2023, while Matteo was at the other end of the table, cutting his ham into geometric shapes. Those musty old papers are just sitting up there gathering silverfish. I remember the exact moment, because Matteo looked up from his plate, looked at my mother for what must have been 3 full seconds, and then went back to building a quadrilateral out of ham without saying a word. He was 8. He already knew the shape of what she was doing. After Christmas, the comments arrived monthly, like a subscription. "Honey, have you given any thought to what to actually do with all those papers? Caleb and Whitney's wine room is going to be such a beautiful addition to the house. You know that whole upstairs corridor is dead space. Your father can't manage those North Wing stairs anymore. Honestly, Helena, the kind thing would be to clear the room out." I gave her the same answer every time. "They're not mine to clear, Mom. They are on permanent loan to Matteo through the trust." And my mother gave me the same exact response every time, a small, tight smile, half pity and half impatience, the kind of smile you give a grown daughter who has clearly never grown up. Aunt Theodora and her permanent things. Here is what I did not understand, until I understood it far too late. My mother's fixation on those maps was not, in the end, about money. It was about Theodora. 16 years earlier, Theodora had quietly redrafted her own will. She had skipped my mother. She had skipped my father. She had skipped my brother. She had left the trust, the residual estate, and the conditional residency in the Galena house directly to me, and after me, to my son. My mother had married into the Marston family at 23, already 2 months pregnant with my brother, and she had spent the next 34 years walking under that roof, repainting that roof, hosting Christmases under that roof, and the language of Theodora's documents had made it, in the most courteous legal phrasing money could buy, perfectly clear that Dr. Theodora Marston did not consider my mother a custodian of the family's intellectual property. That wound never sealed over. It only grew teeth. 3.5 months before my son and I left for the cabin in the Boundary Waters, my brother Caleb's wife, Whitney, posted, on a private Instagram account I was not supposed to know existed, a photograph of the upstairs north corridor of the Galena house with the caption, "Future cellar, finally." I saw the post. A college friend of mine who follows her had screenshotted it to me as a joke. I thought she meant her own house. I thought she'd bought a place. I scrolled past, the way you scroll past something you do not yet have language for. That was my first mistake. Every other Saturday, I drove Matteo 3.5 hours from our apartment in Madison, Wisconsin, down through the Green River country into Galena. My parents lived in that house full-time. They had for 34 years. We visited the map room, That was the arrangement, written into the trust instrument in a single sentence on page 17. The beneficiary retained unrestricted scholarly access, and in return, the property kept its conditional exemption. Mateo had a routine. He would push open the heavy oak door of the map room with both palms. It was a hinge that had needed adjusting since 1996, and nobody had ever adjusted it. And he would walk straight to the third drawer from the bottom on the western bank of cabinets. That drawer held a single 1690 manuscript chart of the Caribbean, drawn in iron gall ink on vellum, with a tiny pen and ink mermaid in the lower left margin that Theodora used to say was probably the work of a bored apprentice. Mateo loved the mermaid. He would slide the drawer open with both hands, always both hands, even on a map that weighed less than a slice of bread, lift the map by its archival mat onto the long oak study table, and trace the mermaid's tail with the very tip of his index finger, never touching the ink itself. Then he would turn the map over and find Theodora's label on the back of the mat. For Mateo, who will keep them honest. He would whisper it, out loud, every single Saturday. Same drawer, same map, same ritual. 3 years. One afternoon, when he was 7, he told me the mermaid looked sad because she was facing the wrong way. I told him she was facing where the cartographer wanted you to think the danger was. He told me he preferred his interpretation. I told him that was fair, and that scholars had been arguing about exactly that question in journal articles for 40 years, and that his was as defensible as theirs. The week before we left for the cabin, Theodora's voice came back to me. Not as a memory. Memories are softer. This was the way certain sentences arrive, fully formed, in the voice of the person who said them, when your subconscious has decided you've been refusing to hear something. These maps are Mateo's birthright, Helena. Don't let them forget. I thought about calling my mother. I thought about driving to Galena unannounced and standing in the map room with the trust instrument in my hand and reading Section 11 aloud. I thought about asking my brother point blank what Whitney's post had meant. I did none of those things. I told myself it was professional reserve. I'm an archivist. I'm trained in restraint. I told myself I was being measured. I was being a coward. Those two words look identical from the outside. The only thing that separates them is what happens when you finally turn the key in a lock and find the drawers empty. Every spring, the Driftless Cartographic Society, a small academic outfit I'd belonged to since graduate school, ran an 11-day research retreat at a leased cabin compound up on the Minnesota side of the Boundary Waters. No cell service, spotty satellite internet, working when the weather felt generous. I'd been going since my second year out of school. This year, I took Mateo. He packed 3 paperbacks from the Madison Public Library, a sketchbook, a small case of colored pencils sharpened to identical points the way he liked them, and a pair of binoculars I had bought him for his birthday. He did not bring a single map from the collection. Not one. He never removed them from the cabinets. That was the stewardship Theodora had taught him. You visit the maps, Mateo. You are the one who travels. My mother offered to look in on the Galena house while we were gone. Water Theodora's old African violets in the south parlor. Bring in the mail. Make sure the dehumidifier in the map room kept holding its set point. I said that would be a wonderful help. I thanked her. She texted me the evening Mateo and I left for the cabin. The message read, in full, "Have a good trip, sweetheart. We're handling everything down here." I read it 3 times, sitting on a bench at the edge of a lake, while Mateo skipped a flat rock into the shallows. Something about the phrasing didn't sit. We're handling everything. Not, house looks great, or I'll keep an eye on things. Handling. The verb you use about a problem you've been waiting to take care of. I told myself I was overreading a text from my mother. My entire profession is overreading documents. Attribution. Provenance. The difference between what a sentence says and what the person writing it actually meant. Sometimes a text from your mother is just a text from your mother. That was my second mistake. 11 days at the cabin. Mateo finished all 3 paperbacks by day 6, then started filling the sketchbook with the loons he could see from the dock with his binoculars. He drew 31 loons, I counted later. On the 9th evening, lying in his sleeping bag in the bunk above mine with the flashlight propped against his cheek, he said one thing I have replayed in my head every single day since. "Mom, Aunt Theo would have liked this lake, because it doesn't have any borders on it." I waited until he was asleep before I cried into the rolled-up sweatshirt I was using for a pillow. And even then, I cried so quietly that the floorboards above me didn't creak. We drove home on a Thursday. 11 days without a proper shower, 1 filled sketchbook, a sunburn across the back of my neck from the canoe. I told Mateo we would stop at Theodora's house on the way back to Madison so he could check the mermaid map before bed, because we'd been gone long enough that he wanted to make sure she was still facing the wrong direction. He said okay without looking up from a half-finished drawing of a loon's foot. The drive from the Boundary Waters to Galena takes about 6 hours through farm country. I used most of it to mentally catalog work. Grant deadlines, a conservation report I needed to finalize, 3 condition assessments waiting on my desk. When we pulled into the driveway of the Marston house at 6:20 in the evening, the porch light was on and a stack of mail leaned against the front door. 5 days' worth. Maybe 6. My parents' car was not in the driveway. I texted my mother. No reply. I texted my father. Nothing. I used the spare key from the loose brick in the 3rd porch column, the one Theodora had hidden there in 1981 and that nobody had ever moved, and opened the front door. The house was clean. Unusually clean. Fresh vacuum tracks running parallel on the hallway runner. A vanilla-scented candle burning on the kitchen counter. The candle my mother only ever lit when she was trying to cover another smell. I walked toward the north wing. The corridor to the map room is 19 steps from the kitchen doorway. I know this because I have been counting them since I was 4 years old. And when you grow up in a house with an archive, counting is a reflex you never lose. The map room door was already open. The overhead lights were on. Theodora had insisted, in writing, that overhead lighting was never to be used in that room. UV degrades pigment. The standing lamps at each corner of the study table were the only legal sources of light. Somebody had flipped the wall switch and walked out and left it on. I stepped in. The room smelled like dust and vanilla. Not paper, not vellum, not the faint mineral note of beeswax. The cabinets were closed. I crossed to the western wall and pulled out the 3rd drawer from the bottom. It was empty. I pulled out the drawer above it. Empty. I went down the row. Every drawer. Then the eastern bank. Then the south bank. 183 slots. Every one of them empty. I don't know why my first impulse was to count, but it was. I think it was the archivist in me, needing to quantify the missing before I could let myself feel that they were missing. On the long study table at the center of the room, there was a single folded sheet of paper. Letterhead from a private dealer in Chicago. Heindorf and Bowles, Antiquarian Cartography. Dated 6 days earlier. Total? $240,000. Seller? Roland Marston. My father had initialed each of the 11 pages. My mother had signed as witness on page 7. The bill of sale listed every item by Heindorf's temporary catalog number, with thumbnail photographs of the higher value lots in the margin. A certified check had been deposited into my parents' joint account at a small Galena bank. $240,000 for 183 items that did not belong to my parents in any legal definition of the word belong. I heard the front door behind me, small footsteps on the hardwood. Mateo was standing in the doorway. He looked past me at the cabinets, the way a person looks at a familiar room in a dream, recognizing the shape but not the silence. I tried to step sideways to block his view. He didn't move. His eyes found the 3rd drawer from the bottom on the western wall. The mermaid's drawer. The drawer he had opened with both hands every other Saturday for 3 years. He looked at the drawer. Then he looked back at me. He did not cry. He did not ask a question. He turned around and walked back down the corridor. 9 years old, and he had read the room before I had said a single word. I sat down in Theodora's green leather chair. The leather was cold. I didn't cry either. I was already counting other things. Invoices, filings, statutes of limitation, the number of days it was going to take to put every map back in every drawer. My parents came home at 7:40 that evening, carrying a takeout bag from a place in town that does Northern Italian and a bottle of wine in a paper sleeve. My mother was wearing a small gold pendant I had never seen before, a tiny enamel grape cluster. My father was humming. They walked into the kitchen smiling. I was sitting at the kitchen table, with my hands folded on the placemat and the bill of sale from Heindorf and Bowles underneath my left palm. Matteo was in the front parlor with his sketchbook, pretending to draw, drawing nothing. My mother set the takeout bag on the counter and saw me, and her smile adjusted itself by perhaps 2 degrees. "Helena, sweetheart, we weren't expecting you tonight." "Mom, where are the maps?" My mother tilted her head, the exact angle she uses when she is preparing to explain that a thing I have brought up is too small to be a thing. "Oh, Helena, they were collecting dust up there. Caleb knew a wonderful dealer. We did a kindness for everybody. Caleb and Whitney are going to have the most beautiful cellar. We had the tiles flown in. Real Tuscan terracotta. You should see them. They have this warmth to them. You don't get that with anything domestic." She said it the way you describe a problem you have finally, courageously fixed for the family. My father uncorked the wine. "Honey, those papers weren't doing anyone any good just sitting in the dark." I looked at him for a long, level second. "Dad, did you read the label on any of them?" My mother waved her hand. "Theodora's little notes. Helena. She has been gone almost 3 years. Let her rest." I looked at the wine glass. I looked at the new pendant. I looked at the takeout bag from the restaurant in town. I did the math in my head between the cost of a bottle of Barolo and the balance of $240,000, less a custom wine cellar with imported tile. Then I stood up. "Thank you for the offer of dinner. I'm not staying." I walked to the front parlor, picked up Matteo's jacket, and said, "Sweetheart, we're going home." We drove back to Madison in the dark. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam any doors. I closed the front door of that house behind me the way you close a book you fully intend to come back to. The drive from Galena to Madison takes about 2.5 hours. Matteo fell asleep before we crossed the river. He woke up somewhere outside Mineral Point, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. "Mom, did Grandma sell them?" "Yes, sweetheart." A long quiet. I watched the dashboard clock because it was the only light in the car, and I could not stop counting things. 4 minutes. Then, "Did she sell the mermaid one too?" "I think so, buddy. But I am going to bring them all back. Every single one." Another long quiet. Then, "Okay." Just that. "Okay." I have signed payroll authorizations for 16 employees. I have signed acquisition agreements worth 6 figures. I have signed sympathy cards at funerals where I meant every word. I have never carried a single word the way I carried the word, "okay," in my son's voice that night. It contained trust and grief and a question he was too proud to ask out loud. Can you actually do this? Are you going to be the kind of mother who promises me a thing she cannot deliver? I drove the rest of the way home with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the manila folder of trust documents I had pulled from the small, fireproof box in my home office before we left for the cabin. My mother had not noticed I'd taken it. She had been too busy describing the heated floor in the cellar. If you have ever made a promise to your child that you weren't fully sure you could keep, and then spent the rest of the drive home figuring out, sentence by sentence, exactly how you were going to keep it anyway, leave a comment with the word drawer. That's the sound this story turns on. Subscribe so the rest of it reaches you on time. That night, after Mateo went to bed, clutching a library paperback instead of a 400-year-old chart, I opened the folder on my kitchen table. Inside was a document I had not read all the way through in 4 years. The permanent loan-back agreement between the Theodora Marston Cartographic Trust and the residents at 1147 North Bench Road, Galena, Illinois. 18 pages, 3 signatures, and one clause that was about to cost my parents the house they had lived in for 34 years. It was 3 a.m. Mateo was asleep at the other end of the apartment. My laptop was open to the IRS publication on conditional exemptions and recapture provisions. My phone was face down. Next to the laptop was a printout of the Heindorf and Bowles invoice. Next to that, the firm's public website, which featured a tasteful black and white photograph of Anders Heindorf himself, the senior partner, 60-something, white-haired, the kind of man who had clearly handled an awful lot of objects worth more than the cars in the parking lot of the building he worked in. The man knew what he was doing for a living. That was going to matter. I opened the trust instrument and the loan-back agreement side by side. 18 pages, notarized in Cook County in 2009, filed in Springfield, bearing the seal of the trust and 3 signatures: Theodora Marston, Eleanor Voss, and Augustin Reyes. Eleanor was the trust's chair, Theodora's closest friend from graduate school, retired by then from a long career at the Newberry. Augustin was the trust's counsel, a lawyer Theodora had been using since the early 80s. I had a passing professional acquaintance with both of them. I was about to know them very well. I read Section 11 twice. Then I read it a third time because the numbers behind it were large enough to require verification. And at 3 a.m, with 9 years of an unspoken family argument now finally arriving at its written-down conclusion, I did not trust myself to read carelessly. The clause was titled Recapture. The language was lawyerly, but it boiled down to this: any unauthorized disposition of the collection, sale, gift, transfer, loan to any party outside the trust, or removal from the protected premises without trust authorization by anyone other than the named beneficiary or the trust itself constituted a recapture event. Under state law, that event triggered full retroactive assessment of every year of conditional property tax exemption the residents had received, plus statutory interest, plus a penalty equal to 75% of the abated tax. Under federal law, because the trust had taken a charitable deduction position on the original gift of the collection in 2009 and had carried that position through 14 annual filings, the unauthorized disposition also triggered the recapture provisions on the federal side, which is a slightly elegant way of saying a tax bill landed on the residents and the seller on the same day, in 2 different colors of envelope. I picked up my phone and wrote one email. To Eleanor Voss. Subject line: Trust breach. Please call me at 7. 3 sentences in the body. I hit send at 3:19 a.m, and I did not sleep again that night. Eleanor called at 6:58. She did not say good morning. She said, "Helena, what happened?" I told her in under 4 minutes. She listened without interrupting. Eleanor and Theodora had been close for the better part of 50 years. Eleanor did not waste a single syllable on anything in her life, and she was not about to start now. When I finished, she was quiet for 6 seconds. Then she said, "Pull up the loan-back agreement, Section 11. I already have it open. Read me the recapture clause." I read it the way I read everything that matters, slowly and evenly, without emphasis, letting the language carry its own weight. When I finished, she was quiet for another 4 seconds. Then she said, "All right, So, on the state side, your parents owe back property tax going back to 2009 with statutory interest, plus the 75% penalty. The county will issue a revised assessment within 30 days. Going forward, the house pays full freight, which in your part of Galena is going to land somewhere around $26,000 a year. On the federal side, the IRS is going to recapture the charitable deduction value carried across 14 filings, plus interest. They will place a federal lien on the residence for the recaptured amount. Between the lien, the back state taxes, the penalty, and the new annual assessment, my best estimate of total exposure to your parents is somewhere between $470,000 and $510,000. They will not be able to carry it. They will have to sell the house. As for the collection itself, it is trust property, not personal property. We have a clawback under Section 14 of the loan-back agreement. If Heindorf cooperates, he refunds the buyers, the maps come home, and we don't have to file. If he doesn't cooperate, Augustine files in federal court next week. I wrote everything down on a yellow legal pad, not on the laptop. Paper does not have a cloud. Paper does not have a shared family iCloud account that my mother could conceivably access through my father. Eleanor was the only living person on Earth who could pronounce the phrase $470,000 the way other people pronounced pass the salt. She gave me the numbers, the deadlines, and the next 3 steps in order. That was worth more, in that hour, than sympathy. Collecting dust. $470,000 of dust. At 9:14 the following morning, I called Heindorf and Bowles from the parking lot of a coffee shop in Madison. The receptionist transferred me. Anders Heindorf picked up on the second ring. His voice was unhurried and pitched low. The voice of a man who has spent 40 years handling objects worth more than houses and has learned very early to never sound surprised on the phone. Mr. Heindorf, my name is Helena Trevino. I am the vice chair of the Theodora Marston Cartographic Trust. You purchased 183 items last week from my father, Roland Marston. A pause, just long enough to be polite. Yes, Mr. Marsden brought a full inventory. We completed the transaction in person at the residence. Have you resold any of them yet? We do not list before we catalog. Standard practice for a collection of this caliber. We are still photographing the manuscript material. Nothing has gone out. Mr. Heindorf, those items are on a permanent loan back from a registered 501c3. They are trust property. They are not personal assets, regardless of the name on the deed of sale. Section 14 of the loan back agreement triggers a clawback under unauthorized disposition. I am formally requesting their return. Silence. 4 seconds. I counted because I count everything now. Then, very calmly, the way you reset a transaction at the front desk of a bank. Ms. Trevino, I would like to see that agreement. I can be in my office at 4 this afternoon. Can you get a copy to me by then? I'll bring the original. I will be in your office at 4. I hung up. My hands were steady. 15 years of handling irreplaceable documents teaches you one useful thing. The most important phone call of your life should sound like every other phone call you have ever made. No tremor in the voice, no urgency in the phrasing. State the fact, name the mechanism, offer the evidence. Let the person on the other end finish doing the arithmetic on their side of the desk. I drove back to my apartment and got Mateo into the car. I was not going to leave my 9-year-old in Madison while I drove to Chicago. He was coming with me. He was going to see the maps. He was going to watch his mother stand in a paneled office on Michigan Avenue and ask for them back. The drive from Madison to Chicago is about 2.5 hours. Mateo sat in the back with a library copy of Tuck Everlasting and his sketchbook. The folder containing the trust instrument and the loan back agreement sat on the passenger seat. 18 pages, weighing less than a sandwich and more than anything else in the car. Somewhere past Rockford, Mateo looked up from the book. Mom, what's clawback? It's when a thing goes back to who it really belongs to. Like a library book. Yes, exactly like a library book. A long pause. Mom, why didn't you tell Grandma about the trust thing before she sold them? I thought about that question for almost a full mile. Then I told my son the truth. Because he was 9 and had earned it. Because I thought that if I never said it out loud, she would never do anything that would force me to. That's not very smart, Mom. No, buddy, it wasn't. That was the first time in my son's life he had told me I was not being smart. It was also the first time I had agreed with him out loud. I had spent 4 years burying myself in finding aids and condition reports and conservation grants because paper does not give you the silent treatment for 6 weeks. Paper does not call you ungrateful for protecting what a dead woman left your child. Professional withdrawal is the polite name for what I had been doing. The real name is cowardice in a cardigan and white cotton gloves. Theodora's voice arrived again, the way it does. These maps are Mateo's birthright. Don't let them forget. I had not forgotten. I had simply been too soft about remembering. Heindorf and Bowles occupied the 3rd floor of a converted bank building 2 blocks west of Michigan. Walnut paneling, brass reading lamps, gallery lighting. Anders Heindorf met us at the receptionist's desk himself. White hair, reading glasses on a small chain. A handshake that had been calibrated over 40 years to communicate seriousness without intimidation. He looked at Mateo. "He is welcome to come back," I said. "He is the beneficiary." Heindorf nodded once and led us down a long hallway to the catalog room. Climate-controlled, 68 degrees, 45% relative humidity. I knew that without asking, because those are the numbers every working archivist carries in our heads the way paramedics carry blood pressure ranges. 183 items were laid out on 6 long oak tables under soft archival lights. Each one had a small yellow tag in Heindorf's careful hand, bearing a temporary catalog number. He walked us along the tables without speaking. Mateo found the mermaid on the 4th table. He picked up the archival folder it was housed in, very carefully, with both hands. He opened it. He found her in the lower left corner, facing the wrong way she had faced the wrong way since 1690. He looked at me. "Mom, she's okay." Heindorf, standing 2 steps behind us, said quietly, "Yes, she's been fine. We noticed her right away. She's an unusual little signature on a chart of that period." Mateo turned the folder over, looking for the label on the back of the mat. He found it. He traced Theodora's handwriting with the very tip of his index finger. "For Mateo, who will keep them honest." He closed the folder and pressed it against his chest with both arms. He did not ask if he could take it home. He just held it. Heindorf looked at me. "Every one of them has a label like that, doesn't it?" "Every one." "Your father did not mention any of that." "I know he didn't." I laid the trust instrument and the loan-back agreement on the empty 7th table. Heindorf sat down. He put his glasses on. He read for 14 minutes. I counted, because Mateo was counting the ceiling tiles. When Heindorf finished, he removed his glasses, set them on the document, and looked at me. "Miss Trevino, I purchased trust property." "Not knowingly," I said. "There is a difference. The difference matters to my insurer, and it will matter to a court if it gets to one. It does not matter to me. My grandfather opened this firm in 1948. We do not deal in trust property. Full stop." He stood. He walked across the catalog room to a steel filing cabinet and pulled out the file from the purchase, the deed of sale. Photocopies of my father's driver's license, my mother's signature as witness, a photographed inventory in which every item, in the lower right corner, plainly showed the small engraved label on the back of the mat. For Matteo, who will keep them honest. Documented. Photographed. Sitting in Heindorf's professional records. He turned to the third page of the inventory and tapped it. Every folder had a small printed slip inside the cover as well. Did you see those? I knew they were there. It says, in plain English, that the item is on permanent loan from the Theodora Marsden Cartographic Trust and is not for sale, and that any unauthorized transfer triggers a recapture event under Section 11 of the trust instrument. Your father signed our bill of sale anyway. He either did not read the slip, or he did read it and chose to sign. I do not know which is worse. Neither do I. Heindorf slid the entire file across the table to me with both hands. Deed of sale, inventory, photographs, embedded notices. 3 centimeters of paper documenting $240,000 of mistake. I will hold the collection here for 14 days while you file, he said. After that, on your written authorization, the maps ship back under archival transport. I will pay for the freight. Make it 21. He looked at me. I want the IRS notice issued and acknowledged before the maps move. That way the chain of custody never breaks. He looked at me again, the way one archivist looks at another when they realize, finally, that they are speaking the same language. 21 days. Drive carefully home, Ms. Trevino. I drove home that night with 3 centimeters of paper on the passenger seat and a sleeping 9-year-old in the back who, somewhere on the Illinois side of the state line, whispered the word, mine, without opening his eyes. The voicemail started the next morning at 7:41. My mother. Helena, we need to talk. Sweetheart, don't do anything before we talk. 8:12. My brother Caleb. Helena, Whitney is in tears. Tyler, that's their 3-year-old, was looking forward to having a movie night down there with his cousins. You are being insane about this. Call me. 9:03. A text from Whitney. You are ruining this family over paper. Lowercase the entire way through. 3 exclamation points at the end. I screenshotted every one of them and forwarded them to Eleanor. She replied in 40 seconds. Document, don't engage, don't respond, don't apologize, don't explain. Save everything. I spent that morning at my own desk at the Historical Society in Madison, doing what I do every weekday. Cataloging, reviewing condition reports, signing off on intake, and between entries, drafting a personal affidavit describing the discovery, the Heindorf invoice, the conversation with my parents in the kitchen, my mother's exact words, the time on the clock, and the trip to Chicago. Augustin Reyes, the Trust's counsel, was meeting me the next afternoon. Augustin had drafted the loan-back agreement clause by clause in 2009. He had argued with Theodora over the phrasing of Section 11 for 3 months. He had, in his own words, lost every single one of those arguments. He knew the document better than its author did, because he had written down everything she had refused to compromise on. I slid the affidavit and the file across his desk at 2:15 the following afternoon. He read it the way lawyers read, with a pen in his hand, illegible small notes in the margin. When he finished, he looked up. Helena, how do you want to handle this? I want the maps back. I want the IRS notified. I want the recapture filed in Springfield. And I want my parents to understand what they have done in a room full of people with the loan-back agreement in their hands. He wrote one line on his pad. When? My brother's wife is hosting a cellar opening on Saturday afternoon. There will be guests. He set the pen down. He looked at me for a long second. Then Saturday it is. On Tuesday afternoon, an emergency meeting of the trust board convened by phone. Eleanor in the chair, Augustin presenting, 3 other trustees on the line, a retired federal judge out of Springfield named Patricia McAllister, a dealer from Boston named Lars Friedland, who had once outbid Theodora at auction in 1994 and considered it the proudest commercial mistake of his career, and Dr. Imani Fry, a cartographic historian at a college in Iowa, whose dissertation Theodora had funded out of her own pocket. I presented the facts: the motion to authorize the clawback letter, the motion to authorize the IRS Form 8283 amendment and Form 990 supplemental disclosure, the motion to notify the Illinois Department of Revenue and the Joe Daviess County Assessor of the unauthorized disposition, the motion to authorize cease and desist letters to Roland and Margaret Marston, the motion to authorize the public reading of the loan-back agreement at any venue I, as vice chair, deemed appropriate. 5 motions. All 5 passed unanimously. Eleanor closed the call with one sentence, quoting Theodora from a phone conversation in 2018. "These maps are Mateo's birthright. Don't let them forget." Then she added, "Helena, I would call this remembering." That night, Mateo's school counselor called me at home. He had not finished a single book during sustained silent reading for 3 school days. He had been sitting at his desk with the book closed in front of him, looking out the window. The counselor was careful, tactful, asked if anything had happened. I told her briefly what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "He doesn't need a formal referral yet, but if he wants to talk in his own time, listen." I made macaroni and cheese from a box because some nights, parenting is a delivery job, not a performance. Mateo pushed the noodles in a figure 8 across his plate. "Mateo, the maps are safe. I have seen them. They are coming home in 21 days. All 183. All 183? Yes. 2 bites. Mom, can Grandma still come visit? I think that is going to be a while, buddy." A long pause. He picked up the fork again. "Okay, I figured." 3 words, the vocabulary of a 9-year-old who has already learned that the people who are supposed to protect your things are sometimes the people you need protection from. Augustine worked Thursday and Friday, 3 letters in parallel. The cease and desist to my parents, citing the loan-back agreement, the unauthorized disposition, and the trust's intention to pursue every remedy on the federal and state side. The IRS Form 8283 amendment and supplemental disclosure, filed to the Estate and Gift Unit in Ogden, Utah, with carbon copy to the Illinois Department of Revenue, formally reporting the unauthorized disposition of conditionally exempt property held by the Theodora Marston Cartographic Trust, and the recapture notice directed to the Joe Daviess County Assessor and the Illinois Department of Revenue with a request for immediate revaluation of the residence at 1147 North Bench Road. All 3 letters printed, signed, sealed, and scheduled for certified hand delivery on Friday at 5 in the afternoon. I asked Augustine why 5 on a Friday. He looked at me over his reading glasses. "Because the assessor's office closes at 4. Because no judge is going to issue a Saturday morning temporary restraining order over a tax notice on a Friday afternoon. Because your parents are going to spend Friday evening, Saturday morning, and Saturday afternoon calling every tax attorney within 50 miles of Galena, and not one of those attorneys is going to pick up the phone until Monday." I said, "Theodora would have liked you." He said, "I had the pleasure of being her counsel for 21 years. She once called me at 11 o'clock at night to argue about a single comma in the preamble of this exact document. She won the argument. She won every single comma argument we ever had." Friday evening, I laid out Mateo's clothes for Saturday. A dark blue button-down, clean jeans, the pair of leather shoes Theodora had bought him for her own 85th birthday party. I laid out my own clothes, a gray dress, plain, black flats, and on the top of the dresser, the brooch Theodora had left me in her personal effects, a small enamel compass rose, no larger than a quarter, with a single garnet at the north point. I had not worn it since her funeral. I held it in my palm for a long time. Then, I set it on the dress. 5:02 on Friday. I was at my desk at the Historical Society with my phone face up on the blotter, screen bright, volume off. Augustine texted at 5:02. Both packages hand-delivered, signed for by Margaret Marston. I set the phone down. 5:14, missed call, Mom. 5:21, missed call, Mom. 5:30, missed call, Dad. 5:44, missed call, Caleb. 5:49, a text from my mother that read only, "What is this?" 6:03, a text from my mother, "Helena, please." 6:11, a voicemail from my mother whose voice was already cracked at the seams. "I am your mother. We did this for the family. Why are you doing this through lawyers, through strangers? Why couldn't you call us, Helena? You are punishing us. Please, call your mother." 6:31, a second voicemail from my mother, in the harder, more familiar register. "You are going to ruin your brother's life. I hope you can live with yourself." 7 calls in 72 minutes. I sent one text. To Augustine. "See you tomorrow at 3:30. Then I put the phone in my bag, locked the office, and drove home to Madison in the dark. If you have ever watched the phone of your own kitchen light up over and over with the names of people who used to assume you would always be the one who answered, and you have finally felt the small interior click of choosing not to, leave a comment with the word click. That is the sound this story turns on a second time. Subscribe so you are there for what happens at the cellar opening. I had not raised my voice in 12 days. I had not sent a single angry text. I had not cried in front of anyone except a rolled-up sweatshirt at a cabin in Minnesota. Saturday, at 3:30 in the afternoon, there were going to be at least 28 guests at my brother's house in the south end of Galena, drinking wine in a cellar paid for with my son's inheritance. I was going to walk into that house at 4, with the loan-back agreement in a soft leather folder, my mother's compass rose brooch pinned to the lapel of a plain gray dress, and my 9-year-old son holding my hand. Saturday morning at 10:15, I was at my desk at the Historical Society reading a condition assessment when my mother walked in through the front entrance of the building. I had not seen her in 12 days. She was wearing a navy cashmere wrap and the small gold pendant from the kitchen. Her eyes were swollen. Her makeup was, as always, exact. The visual of a woman who had cried for most of the night and had then spent 45 minutes making sure the evidence was invisible. "Sweetheart, let's go get a coffee. We can sort this out. You don't need Augustine. You don't need Eleanor. We are family." "Mom, Augustine was Theodora's lawyer for 21 years. He drafted the loan-back agreement himself. He has been involved in this since 2009. She shifted her weight. She touched the pendant. Aunt Theodora was not herself at the end. Helena, you know that. She was confused. She wasn't thinking clearly when she put all that paperwork together. We are her family. She would have wanted family to have those things. I thought about Theodora at 85, calling Augustine at 11 at night to fight him over a single comma. I thought about the empty drawers in the map room. I thought about Matteo whispering, "For Matteo, who will keep them honest," out loud, every other Saturday for 3 years. Mom, Theodora was the most precise person I have ever met. She filed everything in triplicate because she knew exactly what was going to happen the minute she was gone. She knew somebody in this family would try exactly what you tried. The triplicate was for me. My mother's jaw tightened, the familiar reflex. Those musty papers were just sitting up there gathering silverfish, Helena. 4th time I had heard that exact sentence. Same wording, same cadence, same conviction that repetition could turn it into truth. I stood up from my desk. Mom, I will see you at 4. We canceled the cellar opening. No, you didn't. Whitney posted on Facebook last night. 28 people accepted. My mother looked at me. I held her eyes. She turned and walked out of the building without closing the door behind her. I closed it for her. gently. I close everything gently now. At 2:20 that afternoon, my father knocked on my apartment door in Madison. Through the peephole, I saw him. He looked smaller than I remembered, as though his skeleton had decided, somewhere in the last 12 days, to give up half an inch. I opened the door. We stood in the hallway. He didn't come in. Helena, I signed the bill of sale. I read what I was signing. I know, Dad. Your mother told me Aunt Theodora would have wanted Tyler and Hazel to have a real wine cellar, that she would have wanted the family to share that house properly. I let myself believe it because saying no to your mother for 45 years has been. He stopped. He looked at the ceiling. He worked his jaw the way he does. I am tired, Helena. I am just so tired. I leaned against the doorframe. Dad, I appreciate that you came here to say that, but the IRS doesn't care that you were tired. Will we lose the house? Yes. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that told me the truth. Theodora warned me. The week before she died. She called me into her bedroom and she said, Roland, Margaret is going to try. Don't help her. And I helped her anyway. He looked down at his shoes. Tell Mateo, I am sorry. I am not going to deliver messages from you to my son, Dad. When he is ready, he will come to you. That is not yours and not mine to arrange. He nodded. He turned. He walked down the hallway. The stairwell door closed behind him. I locked my apartment door. My hand on the deadbolt was steady. 12 days earlier, it would have been shaking enough to need both hands. That steadiness, more than any of Augustine's drafting, more than any of Eleanor's filings, more than any of the trust board's motions, was how I knew I was ready for 4 o'clock. At 3:15, Mateo was sitting on the edge of his bed in the dark blue button-down and the leather shoes Theodora had bought him. My gray cardigan was folded across the foot of the bed because he had asked to borrow it. He looked like a boy preparing for a ceremony, which, in a way, he was. Mom, I am going to read something out loud at the party today. Some difficult things are going to be said. Grandma may cry. You do not have to be there for any of it. Will the maps be there? Not today. But in 21 days, they will be back in their drawers. Every single one. A pause. I want to come. Are you sure? Aunt Theo would have come. I smiled for the first time in 12 days. Aunt Theo would have come with a compass on her collar. Do you have one? I opened the top drawer of my dresser. The little enamel compass rose, North Point garnet. I pinned it to my lapel in front of the mirror. Mateo watched from the bed. Mom, you look like Aunt Theo. Good. We drove to Caleb and Whitney's house in Galena in a silence that was nothing like the heavy silence of the drive home 12 days earlier. This was the silence between two people who have agreed on what is about to happen and have nothing left to negotiate about. Augustine was meeting us at 3:45 at the corner of Bench Road and Hill. He would be carrying a soft leather folder. Inside the folder were 16 copies of the loan-back agreement and a certified letter from the IRS Estate and Gift Unit acknowledging receipt of the Form 8283 amendment. Mateo sat in the back with a library copy of Tuck Everlasting open in his lap. He read until we turned onto my brother's street. Then he closed the book, slid it into his backpack, and said, Ready. I said, Ready. 14 cars in the driveway and along the curb. A small chalkboard sign at the foot of the front steps in Whitney's careful handwriting. Cellar opening. Welcome. Through the front window, I could see champagne flutes arranged in a careful pyramid on a side table, my mother's white linen runner across the dining table, and a hand-lettered banner stretched above the open cellar door that read, The Marston Wine Cellar. Grand Opening. 28 guests. I knew about half of them. 3 of the neighbors from Bench Road who had known me since I was a child. 2 of Caleb's college friends and their wives, Patricia Donnelly, my mother's oldest friend in town, and a retired 6th-grade English teacher. Doug and Kathy Halloran, who owned the hardware store on the square. Lorraine Pike and Judith McGrath from my mother's Tuesday book group. Father Joseph Donovan from the Lutheran Church on Spring Street, where my parents had attended for 31 years. 4 of Caleb's co-workers from the firm in their Saturday casual button-downs. The cousin from Whitney's side of the family who always shows up. Tyler and Hazel, my brother's 2 children, 3 and 5, already eating tortellini out of a small bowl in the cellar, with Whitney's mother supervising them from a wing chair. Augustine arrived at 3:46, 1 minute late, carrying the folder. We walked up the front path side by side. Mateo walked between us. Whitney opened the front door before we rang the bell. She was holding a glass of white wine. Her smile collapsed the moment she registered Augustine's suit and the folder. "Helena, hi. Why are you—" "Whitney, I'd like to come in. May I speak with my parents and your husband in the front room, please?" "We have guests, Helena. This isn't a—" Augustine said, very evenly, "Mrs. Marston, may we come in, please?" She stepped back from the door. We came in. My mother appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a striped towel. She saw Augustine. She saw me. She saw the compass rose on my collar. She saw Mateo's hand in mine. Something behind her eyes did a small, careful arithmetic. "Helena, sweetheart, please. Not here. Not today." "Mom, you did not cancel the party. You canceled the wrong thing. The party is not the problem. 11 years of pretending Theodora's wishes were optional. That is the problem." Caleb came in from the back hallway. He was holding a wine bottle by the neck. "You have got to be kidding me, Helena." "Caleb, could you ask everyone to come into the living room, please? I have a document I would like to read aloud. It will take 5 minutes. Then we will leave." Whitney started to say something. Caleb looked at his wife, then at our mother, then at me, then at the suit standing next to me. He set the wine bottle down on the side table next to the pyramid of empty flutes. He went into the cellar and asked everyone to come up to the living room for a moment, please. 28 people in a living room, standing against the walls, sitting on couch arms, leaning in the doorway from the kitchen with champagne flutes they had stopped drinking from. Through the open cellar door behind them, I could see the Tuscan tile floor, a wall-mounted temperature display reading 55 degrees. $240,000 in stonework and refrigeration humming gently below the floorboards. I held the loan-back agreement. 18 pages, stapled. The embossed seal of the trust visible on page 1. My hands were steady. "My name is Helena Trevino. Most of you have known me since I was a child. I am Margaret and Roland Marston's daughter. I am Caleb's older sister. I am the vice chair of the Theodora Marston Cartographic Trust." I paused. I let the sentence land. 12 days ago, while my son and I were at a research retreat in northern Minnesota, my parents sold a 183-piece map and chart collection from the map room of the family house on Bench Road. They sold it to a Chicago dealer for $240,000. They used the proceeds to build what is humming under the floor you are standing on. They believed those maps belonged to them. They did not. I am going to read aloud the document that explains why. It has been a public record at the Illinois Secretary of State's office since November 2009. My mother, from the far wall, in a very small voice. "Helena, please." Augustine, half a step behind my right shoulder, said quietly, "Mrs. Marston, please let her finish." I read the preamble, the legal identification of the trust, the legal identification of the residents, the legal identification of the collection. 183 items of preeminent cartographic and historical significance. The legal identification of the beneficiary, Mateo Trevino, age 9 at time of reading, with lifetime scholarly access and sole veto authority over any transfer. Then I turned to page 11. Section 11, Recapture. I read it the way I read everything that matters, slowly, evenly, without emphasis. Any unauthorized disposition of the collection by any party other than the named beneficiary, currently Mateo Trevino, shall constitute a recapture event under applicable federal and Illinois state tax law, triggering full retroactive assessment of all years of conditional property tax exemption from 2009 forward, with statutory interest and a penalty equal to 75% of the abated tax, and shall additionally trigger federal recapture of all charitable deduction positions associated with the original conveyance. I looked up from the page. My parents sold 183 items last Friday for $240,000. The dealer, Mr. Anders Heindorf of Heindorf & Bowles in Chicago, has agreed to return the entire collection to the trust within 21 days. He understands the situation. He is, in his own words, not in the business of dealing in trust property. As for my parents and this residence, the IRS notice has been issued. The state notice has been issued. The county assessor has been notified. The total exposure is somewhere between $470,000 and $510,000 between back taxes, interest, penalty, federal recapture, and a federal lien. Patricia Donnelly, my mother's oldest friend, sat down very slowly on the arm of the nearest couch. Mr. Reyes has 16 copies of the loan-back agreement in his folder. Anyone who would like one is welcome to take one. Whitney spoke first. This is unbelievable. Helena, you are doing this in front of our friends. You are doing this in front of our children, over a stack of old paper. Mateo was standing beside me. His hand rested on the strap of his backpack. He looked at his aunt. He spoke clearly, without raising his voice, without rehearsal, because I had not coached him to say anything at all. Aunt Whitney, you didn't buy the wine cellar. My maps did. The room held its breath. Tyler, my brother's 3-year-old, was still in the cellar with his grandmother. Hazel, the 5-year-old, was standing in the kitchen doorway, holding a tortellini on a small fork. She looked at her mother. Mom? Whitney said nothing. I put my hand on Mateo's shoulder. He did not flinch. He did not step back. He stayed exactly where he was. I addressed the room one more time. Tyler and Hazel didn't do anything wrong. They are not part of what comes next. Then I turned to my mother. She was pressed against the dining room door frame. She was holding a wine glass, half full, white Chardonnay. The same woman who had told me 4 times that the maps were collecting dust. The same woman who had told me that morning that Theodora had been confused at the end. The same woman who had sold 183 documents inscribed to her own grandson and bought a heated tile floor with the change. Mom. She looked at me. I kept my voice very low. The rest of the room leaned in. The collection was never yours to sell. I said it the way I say everything that matters, softly, without emphasis, the way Theodora had taught me very early to handle fragile things. I almost smiled, not out of satisfaction, not out of cruelty, out of the simple, exhausted relief of a true sentence said out loud in a room full of people who needed, for their own reasons, to hear it. Every single one of those documents was on permanent loan from a registered scholarly trust. The conditional property tax exemption on the family house was contingent on those documents remaining in the map room until they passed to Mateo. By selling them, you triggered a recapture event covering every year of conditional exemption from 2009 through last week. The federal recapture covers every year of charitable deduction position taken on the original conveyance. As of 5 p.m. yesterday afternoon, the exposure to you and Dad is somewhere between $470,000 and $510,000. The county assessor will issue a revised property tax notice within 30 days at the full market rate, which in your neighborhood is approximately $26,000 a year. The exemption existed because the maps were there. The maps are no longer there. The house is no longer exempt. My mother's wine glass slipped against the granite countertop she was leaning on. The rim cracked. Wine spilled across the granite, ran down the cabinet, and pooled on the floor at her feet. She did not look down at it. She was looking at me with her mouth slightly open. The look you give a document that says something out loud that you had been counting on never being written down anywhere. My father sat down on the edge of the couch, slowly, the way you sit down when your knees have already finished an argument with the rest of you. Then my mother's voice climbed. You sold us out. To strangers. To lawyers. To the state of Illinois. For maps. For a dead woman. Helena, she is dead. Why are you destroying this family for a dead woman? Her voice cracked and kept climbing, filling the living room, bouncing off the ceiling, off the grand opening banner, off the pyramid of champagne flutes nobody was drinking from. I could see 4 phones in the room being held at hip height with the camera apps open. I do not know if they were all recording. I hope they were. Because what I said next was the truest sentence I have ever spoken to my mother. And I wanted somebody who was not me to remember it. Mom, I am not doing this for a dead woman. I am doing this for the living one's promise to the boy standing next to me. Mateo did not speak. He did not need to. He was already the answer to every question my mother was too afraid to ask out loud. Augustin opened the folder and laid 16 copies of the loan-back agreement on the coffee table next to the untouched champagne. 3 of the neighbors picked one up. Patricia Donnelly took one. Father Donovan took 2. I spoke to the room one final time. I am sorry you had to be here for this. The cellar opening is over. Then to Whitney. The cellar was paid for with proceeds from the unauthorized disposition of trust property. The proceeds are fully traceable. Mr. Reyes will be in contact next week to discuss restitution. Tyler and Hazel may keep the wall-mounted thermostat, if it gives them any joy. The refrigeration units, the wine racks, and the imported tile floor will be removed at the trust's expense and the cost credited against what is owed. Whitney opened her mouth. Augustin said evenly, Mrs. Marston, the bank records are clear. I looked at my mother one last time. She had not moved from the doorframe. The Chardonnay had spread across the floor and was beginning to soak into the grout under her shoes. Mom, the federal lien hits the residence within 60 days. Between the back taxes and the new assessment, you will not be able to carry the house. Eleanor and I will help with the logistics of the sale if you want our help. Or I will step entirely out of it. That is for you to decide. She said nothing. I took Mateo's hand. We walked out the front door, down the 3 porch steps, across the front lawn to the car. Augustin followed us. The April light was still warm on the back of my neck. On the porch, Mateo looked up at me. Mom, that was the quietest fight I have ever seen. Those are the only ones worth winning, buddy. 21 days later, Heindorf shipped the collection back in 9 archival crates, trust-authorized transport, climate-controlled, fully insured. Eleanor and Augustin met the truck with me at the Galena house. 2 conservators from the Historical Society had driven down with me from Madison to help. 6 hours of careful, methodical reshelving. Mateo placed every single item himself. He started with the smallest of the manuscript charts and worked his way through the 18th century engraved atlases and the 19th century county surveys, checking every label on the back of every mat against the inventory list. He saved the mermaid for last. He carried her folder from the long oak study table to the third drawer from the bottom on the western wall with both hands, and he slid it home. Then he walked to Theodora's green leather chair, climbed up into it, opened the drawer one more time, lifted the folder back out, turned it over, traced the label on the back of the mat with his fingertip. For Matteo, who will keep them honest, and put it back. Then he closed the drawer. He sat very still in the enormous chair for a while. The room smelled like paper again. Eleanor stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, watching. Theodora would have approved. She would have told you not to drag the crates across the runner, Eleanor. Eleanor laughed. It was the first time anyone had laughed in that house in 5 weeks. Within 90 days, the trust board voted to relocate the entire collection to a dedicated climate-controlled study room at a small academic library in Iowa, where Dr. Fry taught. Matteo retained lifetime scholarly access and sole veto over any future transfer. The room was named the Matteo Trevino Reading Room. Theodora's green leather chair came with the maps. It sits next to the study table now, by an east-facing window where the morning light is softer than it ever was in Galena. 8 months later, my parents sold the house at auction. After the federal lien was satisfied, the back state taxes paid, the penalty discharged, and the legal fees settled, they netted enough to buy a small 2-bedroom condominium 20 minutes outside Galena. The balance owed to the federal government is on a 96-month installment plan at the going interest rate. My mother has not contacted me. My father sends a card on the 1st of every month. I read them. I have not written back. Maybe in a year. Maybe in 2. Maybe never. That is allowed. Caleb and Whitney returned the racks and the refrigeration units for credit toward the restitution. They kept the tile floor because the contractor said pulling it up would have damaged the subfloor more than it was worth. We do not speak. Tyler started preschool and, according to a mutual acquaintance, asked his teacher one afternoon with great seriousness what a trust was. I hope somebody gave him an honest answer. Matteo is back at sustained silent reading. He is halfway through a Newbery winner I read at his age. Every other Saturday, in the Matteo Trevino reading room at a small college library in Iowa, he sits in Theodora's green leather chair with his feet still not touching the floor, opens the third drawer from the bottom on the western bank of cabinets, lifts the mermaid out onto the long oak table with both hands, turns her folder over, finds Theodora's label on the back of the mat, and whispers, out loud, "For Matteo, who will keep them honest," before he reads a single word. Setting a boundary with the people who raised you does not mean you have stopped loving them. It means you have finally learned how to love the person they were trying to take from instead. That is my story. 183 maps. 1 9-year-old boy. A 5-minute reading in a living room over the hum of a wine cellar. If this story reminded you that quiet protection is louder than any argument, take that as a sign. Tell someone you love what belongs to them, and write it down somewhere a court can find it. If you know somebody who needs to hear this tonight, share it, leave a comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.